The views and opinions throughout KAZI's broadcast day are not necessarily the views or opinions of KAZI's board, staff, underwriters, or volunteers.
Welcome to ZUMBI, a monthly conversation with artists, activists, and scholars whose work is influenced by the richness of Black life in Austin and around the world. Your host is writer and community curator, Stephanie L. Lane.
Good morning, KZI listeners. Again, this is ZUMBI, named after Afro-Brazilian freedom fighter Zumbi dos Palmares. And as always, I am your host, Stephanie Lane. And as always, making it happen, wearing many, many hats, is Mr. DJ Slice.
Good morning, Stephanie. How are you doing this morning?
I am doing well, very well. All right. So Gregory Farrar is an exhibit assistant at Oakwood Cemetery Chapel, the George Washington Carver Museum, Genealogy and Cultural Center, and an archival volunteer at Huston-Tillotson University. Greg has an interest in videography and the preservation of historic East Austin and its history and culture. He is a descendant of Reuben Shannon Lovinggood, the first president of Samuel Houston College in Austin from 1900 to 1916. And he is a graduate of Pasadena City College with disciplines in engineering, technology, design, and natural science. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, I'm really glad to have you here. You know, one question that came to mind immediately is around the pronunciation of Samuel Houston College. You know, I've heard many folks, you know, my family used to say Huston.
Huston, and I believe the Samuel Huston, who was a farmer from Iowa, that was his name, but through the pronunciation, eventually the name became Samuel Houston College. And just in the same way where Huston-Tillotson is Houston, like the city.
Got you. So you're already dropping knowledge. We just depended in. Okay, so one thing that I think our listeners have become familiar with is really wanting to kind of hear a little bit about the journey to the work that you're doing, and then we will get into a really important exhibit that you played a major role in. So let's start there. Like, what has kind of brought you into the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so it's definitely a long story, but basically over the course of helping my mother do a lot of genealogy on her father's side of the family, we know a lot about her mother's side of the family. And so she started doing the research, and part of that genealogy traced back to Austin, and it's something we always kind of knew about, but we never really understood like the entire impact. You know, growing up in my grandfather's or my grandparents' house, they had this framed picture of a newspaper article, and it said, you know, R.S. Lovinggood, the Booker Washington of the Southwest. And so it's something that was always there. Something that we knew was, you know, basically my grandfather's grandfather had this connection to a school in Texas, but we never really understood the significance of everything put together. And so I was living in California, and eventually I went back to school and finished a couple of degrees and was really looking for the next step. And I think, like a lot of people, you know, trying to make it in high cost of living areas where there's not a ton of options, you have to start thinking outside the box. And I was in a place in my life where I was ready to, I think, move on to something else. And a part of me also wanted to, felt like I needed to almost go back to maybe some old roots to kind of figure out, you know, what I wanted to do with my life and maybe where I was headed. And so that's kind of where the conversation with Austin came into play. And of course, it was myself and my brother. Mm-hmm. And so we made the decision to basically, you know, move 2,000 miles to a place that, you know, none of us had ever been to. And so it was really like coming back to maybe something that was just somewhere in the past that you had this connection to, that you wanted to know more. And so I moved here in, let's see, January 2019. And, very early on, I got to stop by Oakwood. And because I knew that not only R.S. Lovinggood, but several other members of my family, that's where they were buried. And I actually stopped there before the chapel had reopened. And I guess I should mention that the Oakwood Cemetery Chapel went under a restoration, and then eventually reopened in May of 2019. And so I had a couple different chances to stop by Oakwood. And I remember the first time I was there, I was trying to find the monument. So I used Find a Grave because that's how you can kind of tell, okay, what a marker looks like. And it had probably been the last time I think anybody in my family had been here was in, I think, 1983, when my grandparents and some other family members had passed through when they were coming back from a family reunion in Louisiana. And so I kind of walked around the cemetery. I knew that they were buried in the part of the cemetery that was originally part of the segregated section. And I could tell from the photograph of the marker that there wasn't as many monuments, behind. So we talk about the space. And so I kind of walked around in the area that I knew it was somewhere located, just to kind of find it. And I remember basically turning the corner and seeing it, and almost like immediately I felt like, you're rooted, it was like coming back to your people in the sense. And so I stopped, plenty of times at Oakwood just to use the space as a place to reflect and to think about. And Oakwood is such an amazing place. It feels kind of just, trapped in time with Austin. So much happening in Austin, all around it. And Oakwood kind of provides this really solemn place to kind of reflect and think about things. And for me, it was just obviously deeply personal to come back and to see that and to experience that. And so basically from there, I was fortunate enough to get in contact with Danielle McGee of Huston-Tillotson University. Yeah. And so I had a chance to meet with her in the archives and to kind of see what they had on R.S. Lovinggood. And, I was immediately just blown away. I was reading documents that I don't think anybody in my family had ever seen. My great-grandfather, R.S. Lovinggood's first son, came to visit the college in the 60s and actually left a copy of his book that was dedicated about his father's life in the archives. And so the first thing that I saw was his book and actually a handwritten letter from R.S. Lovinggood's son, my great-grandfather. And so it was really neat to be on this journey where you're kind of coming back where people before you hadn't kind of come before. Mm-hmm. And so so I had a chance to look at all these documents, and it's really amazing when you get a chance to read the words of a family member or an ancestor, and to read kind of what they went through, and to draw that parallel of kind of maybe something you're going through. And here I am kind of thinking like, it's crazy to think that maybe, someone writing down words or telling their story would have like such an impact on maybe a descendant or someone else, like 100 years later. And from there, Danielle actually asked me if I wanted to volunteer in the archives. And of course I was over the moon and couldn't say no. And so I was really excited about that, and was able to do a lot of stuff. I'm still kind of finishing up a project there, but of course, due to COVID, had to take a little bit of a break. But basically from there, Danielle actually told me about the historic preservation meetings that the housing and planning department were putting on. And they were like, a week away. And so I got to attend those historic preservation meetings. And that really gave me a sense of kind of where the process was in terms of like the preservation of these different places in East Austin. And basically fast forward to, I believe it was September that year, my mother was visiting, and we actually stopped by Oakwood once again. And this time the chapel was open. And so I had a chance to meet Jennifer Chenoweth, who's the site director over there. And immediately she asked me if I was interested in helping out with the chapel's mission. And of course, once again, I don't think I could say no.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's really inspiring. And it's so similar to my journey in that, like, once you just kind of invest in, fully accepting this journey and the history, right? It just naturally happens. All the opportunities just kind of fall, right?
Well, and I always, when I came to Oakwood and you see the section that was originally segregated, and you see that there's not as many monuments as other sections, and you just see, open, what appears to be open grass. And that there's a much deeper story there. And I almost immediately knew that there was more to that story. It was more than just, me coming back and paying my respects to my ancestors. I kind of got the sense that there was more to it. And yeah.
Absolutely. And I find that to be so true, that this work, especially around the history of Black folks in Austin, and I would gather throughout this country, is really this investigative work, piecing things together. Yeah. Because, the archives, these kind of considered traditional archives, not really valuing that history the same way. The way our communities archive, not necessarily being preserved or held up in the same way. So yeah, there's just this lot of kind of looking at the geography, right, to tell the story. So
yeah, and I know that's something that that's been just, it's extremely, I think, frustrating when you're trying to find knowledge and information, and you're having to go through these records, and you're seeing how the records were kept for people of color. And especially when you're trying to piece something together and you're trying to make a connection, and it's just not there. And it's as you're going through these different parts of history, you can sometimes, get caught up in kind of what the reality was. And so this is why it's so important for anybody to really get involved in kind of doing this kind of genealogy and kind of investigative work, because if nobody else does it, it's not going to get done, and it can be difficult and hard, but I think it's a worthy endeavor for sure.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great segue, right, to talk about kind of the fruit of some of this labor around the exhibition To Elevate. Oh, and perfect timing. So we are going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and get into the exhibition.
Support for KAZI is provided by the Oakwood Cemetery Chapel. The Oakwood Cemetery Chapel presents a new online exhibit about the legacy of Huston-Tillotson University and the people that spent their life's energy building Austin's historically Black university into what it is today. View video, photography, and alumni biographies, including KAZI's own Nelson Linder, Kirk Childress, and Patrick Murphy at austintexas.gov/to-elevate.
Hey, Marion, I just got my COVID-19 vaccine.
Hi, Sue. Good for you. Did you get sick? Did it hurt?
Worry wart. I was fine. I'm on my way to helping myself, my family, and the community get back to normal. I can't wait to hug my grandma soon. Have you gotten your shot yet?
I'm still working on it.
Marion, like I told you before, just go to austintexas.gov/COVID-19 vaccines to pre-register. You need to catch up, buddy.
Support for KAZI is provided by Austin Energy, where customers can get homes winter ready with free energy saving improvements. Whether customers rent or own, Austin Energy's weatherization assistance can help make that home more affordable and energy efficient, all at no cost to the customer. Improvements may include attic insulation, duct sealing, LED lighting, smart thermostats, and more. For details about applying, customers can visit austinenergy.com/go/weatherize. That's austinenergy.com/go/weatherize.
Hey, what's shaking, y'all? This is Noel Gordine. I want you to check out Ingrid After Dark every Friday morning, midnight to 5 a.m. on KAZI 88.7 and on the web at kazifm.org. 88.7 88.7 88.7 Keep it like the KAZI. Yeah.
All right, we are back with ZUMBI, and my guest this morning, Gregory Farrar, who is exhibit assistant at Oakwood Cemetery Chapel. And before the break, we were pivoting into talking about the exhibit to elevate. So, I definitely want to take time for you to share, if you could as well, kind of share how this came to be, as well as details. That would be great.
Yeah. Okay. So to elevate examines and takes a deeper, detailed look of the history and legacy of Huston-Tillotson University, and basically how this came into play. We actually debuted the first iteration at the inaugural African American Genealogy Conference in February of 2020. And since then, we actually wanted to do an expansion of the project. And that is what has taken about 6 months to complete. And this was researching and compiling and creating these story maps. And so we wanted to create this detailed network to essentially go through the entire history and legacy all in one place. And, all the research where you're trying to pull from different links, from different, searching through ancestry, the hope was that we would create this central exhibit or collection where people who wanted to learn more about HTU could go to and get all the information about all the various eras of the HT legacy. And so we started kind of mapping things out. And of course, once you get started, you want to make sure you do justice for each part of the story. And so eventually you end up creating a story map for each of these main focuses. And so we wanted to have our introduction, and then we wanted to move things into talking about HBCUs. How do you introduce and what an HBCU is, or how they came into being to maybe someone who doesn't know. And so it seemed appropriate to kind of start the conversation with that. And so within the HBCU story map, we go back and we look at essentially the creation in general, but then we also look a little bit closer at HBCUs in Texas. And I think a lot of people might be surprised that there's actually another HBCU that started before the roots of Huston-Tillotson. And so essentially, Paul Quinn College actually started in Austin in about 1872, before it moved to Waco, Texas, and before it moved to where it is currently located in Dallas. And so just going through the process of researching, I'm finding out all this information that I had no idea about. And from there, there's also several connections directly to Oakwood Cemetery with another HBCU. So we talk about Prairie View. And one of the residents of Oakwood, also in what was originally part of the segregated section of the cemetery, was William H. Holland. And he was actually the Black legislator that helped sponsor the bill that brought Prairie View into existence. And another Oakwood resident was Helen Mark Kirby, who actually sold the land where basically Prairie View would be situated. And so there's all these like really interesting connections to Oakwood specifically. And so we wanted to start the conversation there, and then we rolled it right into starting with the story map for Tillotson College. And so we break things down kind of by the era. So we have a story map for Tillotson College, a story map for Samuel Houston College, and then we have one for basically when the two schools merged together and formed Huston-Tillotson College. And then we have the final story map for HTU, which kind of focuses on some of the more current things that have happened and that are going on right now. And from there, we highlighted all of the presidents from all eras. And that was really interesting because for some, there's a lot of stuff out there. And for others, I was sometimes you can only find a directory of their name listed. And so that was a challenge, but it really shows you where the research is for a lot of these people. And as you try to dig and find more things, you find all of these really just amazing stories. And from there, we also created a story map that focuses on the faculty, and then also actually 3 story maps that focuses on alumni, since there's so many, and there's just a few that we decided to highlight. And then we go into the individual story maps. And so in the original iteration, we created a section within the first story map for Dr. John Quill Taylor King. And he was the longest serving president within the HT legacy. And then also I was able to bring my research, myself and my mother's research, to create a story map or create a page for Horace Lovinggood. And so from that first iteration, we expanded and we added Dr. Mary Elizabeth Branch, and then also Reverend Carl Everett Downs, and J.J. Seabrook, John Mason Brewer, and Dr. Connie Yearwood Connor.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow, that is just wonderful. But just listening to you, like thinking about all the work that went into this process. And forgive me if you already mentioned this, but in thinking of story maps, can you kind of explain a little bit more about what that is? Mm-hmm.
So a story map is essentially, we use what's called, it's created by Esri, which is basically ArcGIS. So basically what a story map is a geolocated story that you can tell. So basically, if you wanted to create a story map on someone's life, you could pinpoint different locations, like where they were born, what they did, where they went to school on a map, and then you can create a narrative surrounding it. And I think a lot of people might have probably been introduced to ArcGIS through the COVID-19 case numbers and all of that. I think a lot of people have seen those dashboards. Mm-hmm. So this is essentially using that tool and those systems to basically tell stories that are located to a specific place and create narratives around them. And the great thing about this is that these are all digital exhibits. Mm-hmm. So as new information comes out, as we learn new things, we can continue to update them, to add to them, and they essentially will stay on the internet, forever. And so it really gives you a lot of options compared to just a traditional exhibit. Mm-hmm. And it's really great to create these things because you know that this is something that's gonna be online that anybody can access.
That's wonderful. So one of the things that kind of struck me too is you all are in collaboration, right, with the library, the Downs-Jones Library in Huston-Tillotson, which is so important. And like you mentioned with the Genealogy Conference, you know, Kimberly Keaton and, you know, all the work that Oakwood and, you know, yay to Jennifer Chenoweth and Hart and all of the different folks, right, that are doing work. It's just so important to kind of collaborate, right, and not this idea of recreating the wheel, especially around this work. So,
yeah, and I think that would be my hope, is that idea of collaboration and kind of teamwork, where we're all trying to make sure that these stories are told. And it's I think it's an opportunity, but I think it's also a responsibility to bring these things kind of forward, because a lot of these stories have been kind of lost and kind of forgotten about. And, you know, we have a chance to make sure they're not forgotten about. And I think that's what's really important. That's what has kind of constantly kind of driven me to kind of, even if it's a big project and even if it's going to be a lot of work, you know, that you're telling the story of people who are no longer here. And so that adds a lot of motivation to make sure you're doing the story justice, and you're telling all these stories and you're bringing this stuff forward.
Absolutely. Well, in the last few minutes, can you share how people can access this very important work?
Yeah, so you can find the exhibit on our Oakwood Cemetery Chapel .gov webpage. And so it's going to be there for, you know, for all time, as long as the internet is available. And also we're going to be, we're actually running a social media campaign called HT2Me. So you can use the hashtag HT2Me on any social media platform and basically say, you know, what does HT mean to me? And you can record a video. And there's also a place that you can actually put that through the collection as well. And so that's our media campaign, and to kind of get the stories from people on what Huston-Tillotson means to them.
That's great. So there's different opportunities to kind of interact.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. And I encourage you all to check out the Oakwood Cemetery website. There's a lot of, I saw there were some other exhibits.
Yes, we've actually had several other exhibits, and we have several other exhibits planned. And so this is kind of the medium that we use, these digital exhibits, to tell the stories of Austin and its citizens, and kind of tell these stories kind of through time. And so it's just a really great way that we can highlight some of the wonderful individuals that have been residents of our city.
That's great. Thank you so much for what you shared. I've learned some new things and for the work that you do in all of these different spaces, because you're busy.
Yeah, I got a lot of stuff going on, but it's really exciting, and I'm really happy that I can be of service and to help tell some of these stories.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for taking time to be on ZUMBI. And until next time, be gentle with yourself.
Thanks a lot.
You've been listening to ZUMBI with host Stephanie L. Lang on KAZI 88.7, The Voice of Austin. ZUMBI is brought to you with support from the John L. Warfield Center for African and African American Studies and the Center for Community Engagement, two vibrant cultural institutions at the University of Texas at Austin. The views and opinions expressed on ZUMBI may not reflect those of KAZI or the University of Texas at Austin.
You are listening to KAZI Austin.